So, movers and shakers, great entrepreneurs and their impact. What we're going to do in this presentation is to look at exactly what the title says, the way in which great entrepreneurs have an enormous impact upon the history of the world, upon their own society, one that is often not recognized or understood by either their contemporaries or by people subsequently. Now, as we all know, there are some people who are very well known. They're widely recognized. If you see a photograph or a picture of them, you will immediately recognize them. So, for example, celebrities and entertainers. So celebrities and entertainers at a given time are typically public faces, as we say. If you see a photograph of one of them, you'll know them immediately. This, however, does tend to be rather temporary. Celebrity fame is one of these wasting assets, as you might say. Writers might be the same kind of figures, although it is worth saying that very often famous writers, even very widely read and known ones, aren't quite as recognizable as, say, a celebrity is. But it's particularly political figures who are widely recognized and widely known. People know who they are, they're widely recognized. People will instantly recognize a photograph of them or a picture of them, and this also tends to persist. Unlike with celebrities, the fame of political figures is very long-lasting, even permanent. And this apparently is particularly true for despots, for the bad guys of politics. So here we have a kind of rogues gallery. I'm pretty sure you all know who this fellow is. One of the most recognizable faces anywhere, I think it's fair to say. Here's another person, almost equally recognizable. Another sort of major figure in the rogues gallery. Here is a third one, again, another figure who I think most people in the world would recognize, even though it's been quite a long time since he died. Not quite as long as the other two, but still long enough. Now there you have three people who all of them did, I think it's fair to say, some truly terrible and really bad things. They're widely known. They are immediately recognizable. We all know who they were and what they did. Now, is this because they are the only kind of people who've really had an impact on the world? Well, no. What about a different kind of people? Why is it that we recognize politicians, particularly, as I say, despots, but not so much business people? What about entrepreneurs? They're much less widely known or recognized. How many of us would recognize a photograph, for example, of John D. Rockefeller or Henry Ford or Robert Stephenson or Thomas Edison? All people very famous in their day, perhaps, but also people who had an enormous impact on the world. Great entrepreneurs are not household images in the way that the three rogues in that rogues gallery I just went through are. But their impact on the world, the impact that great entrepreneurs have, is as big as that of political figures in many cases. Many of the great entrepreneurs of history have actually played a huge part in shaping the course of human history and the development of society. Here's one, for example, rather portly chap wearing some pretty interesting clothes here, Isaac Singer. Who was he? Well, he was a 19th century businessman who set up the Singer sewing machine company. He didn't actually invent the sewing machine as such, but he was the man who took that invention and turned it into something that could be sold and marketed as a global mass product. And Singer sewing machines were sold and available all over the world. Many of them made, by the way, in an enormous manufacturing complex that his company set up in Clydebank near Glasgow in Scotland. The sewing machine had an incredible impact upon what you might call the household economy worldwide. It transformed the living conditions of ordinary people, particularly, but not only women, because what it did was to turn the task of sewing from being something which was very difficult, very slow, and also something that typically could only be done in our hours of broad daylight, into something that was still very skillful and demanding, but also much easier, much more productive, and which could be done for much larger parts of the day, or even, if you had adequate light, during the night. And it became, therefore, perhaps the great device for self-employed people, particularly for migrants. And if you look at the pattern of migration all over the world in the 19th century, the Singer sewing machine was very often one of the things which people would bring with them when they migrated to one part of the world or another, because it became one of the ways in which people who had no other kind of capital could make a living for themselves. So it had an enormous transformative effect upon the conditions, not only of domestic life, but also of economic life for people at what you might call the bottom of the economic tree. The Singer Company, of course, still going, but not quite as big or important as it was then, but in its time, one of the world's great manufacturing corporations. Here's another man, Akio Morita, the man who founded one of the great companies of Japanese industry for many, many years, Sony. Now, he is responsible, or was responsible, largely on his own account, it has to be said, for adopting and developing and applying to common usage a whole range of important technologies. Most notably, it was Sony and Akio Morita's company, which basically was the first to take the transistor technology that had been developed and used largely for military purposes into something that could be used with regular consumer products. So the transistor radio, which transformed the entertainment and listening experience of people all over the world in the 1950s, 1960s, and subsequently, that really rested upon the technological developments undertaken by the Sony Corporation. He was also responsible, and his company was responsible, for introducing the first personal entertainment product in the name or shape of the Walkman. Now, I think most people below a certain age will have no idea what a Walkman is, but anyone above that age will remember it vividly, because this was a personal tape recorder, if you will, or CD player, which you could carry around with you. And it completely transformed, again, personal entertainment. Although the Philips company was the one that created the compact disc, it was again Sony, which was responsible for really distributing the compact disc worldwide and making it into, for a while, the premier way of storing and recording music, pictures, and other kinds of data. The Sony company also created what for quite a long time was the standard mode of storing computer data, the 3.5 floppy disk. Now, this also shows something else about entrepreneurs, by the way, which is that almost all of these technologies that I've just gone through, which in their time were earth-shaking breakthroughs, which had hugely transformative effects, they're all forgotten now. We've moved on from the Walkman. We've now got cloud streaming devices. We no longer use floppy disks. Nobody these days, I think, would know what a floppy disk is, and you certainly don't find them fitted as normal with computers. But at the time, they were enormously transformative. And this is one of the features of entrepreneurs like Morita. They are people who make the weather, change the world, but then the caravan moves on. Maybe that's one reason why they're forgotten. But if that's the case, why do we still remember politicians when the caravan has moved on from them? Here's another one, Coco Chanel. Obviously well known as the founder of one of the world's great fashion houses, with the absolutely classic perfume No. 5, but also many, many other kinds of products. She was also, though, a great entrepreneur. She was an extraordinarily successful businesswoman, as well as being a great creative designer. And she had, over the course of the 20th century, a dramatic impact upon culture, upon the culture of couture, entertainment, female style, and generally speaking, the whole world of fashion, which in many ways she was one of the great creators of in its modern sense. Again, a huge effect upon society, an enormous effect upon culture. Basically, you cannot imagine the culture of the world we now live in without the kind of legacy that she and other famous entrepreneurs like Helena Rubinstein had. Here's a particularly interesting case. Madam C.J. Walker. Uh, she's actually called Sarah. The C.J. Walker bit is the name of her husband. She's an extraordinary figure. She was born free, but the child of slaves, with several other siblings who'd grown up under slavery before the Emancipation Proclamation. She was not only the first black millionaire, she was also the first woman millionaire in the history of the United States. She made her fortune starting off as a washerwoman and working in very low-paid menial jobs by creating and setting up a line of products for skin care and above all hair care for black women, African-American women and African-American men later on. She learned about this from working with relatives who had a barber shop. She created in Indianapolis, where she moved eventually, her own manufacturing company that manufactured this product. And she set up an enormous customer distribution network of uniformed sales agents who would sell all these products all over the United States. She eventually moved to Irvington upon Hudson, New York, and had her own house built on one of the bluffs overlooking the Hudson River, now preserved as a national monument in the United States. But she wasn't only an enormously successful entrepreneur who created a product or a range of products that had a major part in the lives of all of the now freed African Americans in the second half of the 19th century, first part of the 20th century. She was also very much an example of how entrepreneurs can often use their wealth that they've accumulated by producing useful products for people for advancing social causes. She gave, shortly before her death, the largest ever at that time donation to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People to campaign against lynching. It amounted to the equivalent of $77,000 in contemporary money. She gave large amounts of money throughout her life to promote social activism of all kinds, to support civil rights for both women and African Americans. She also was a major patron of culture and the arts. And this is another example of how entrepreneurs can have an enormous impact. She's also an example of the way in which entrepreneurial business activity is one in which people from minority groups, and very often minority groups who, like her own one, are subject to serious disadvantage, can actually advance and make breakthroughs in society in a way that is much easier than is the case through the medium of politics in many cases. So here is the way to think about this. Entrepreneurs have a massive impact on culture and society as well as economics. It's not just that they create wealth and products that people find useful and which they're prepared to pay for. They also affect the way people live. They have an impact on the culture. They have an impact on the wider society. Not all entrepreneurs are inventors. In fact, the majority are not. But what they all are innovators. They innovate in terms of products, business organization, and even ideas. And in contrast to the three people I showed you in that rogues gallery at the start, they do not use force. No businessman or businesswoman can force people to buy their product. The way entrepreneurs work is by creating a product or a service or improving the delivery of a product or service that is useful for people, that people are prepared to pay for. And by doing that, they improve and change people's lives. Finally, we should think that the category of entrepreneur is not just confined to businessmen and businesswomen. If entrepreneurs are basically innovators who create things that are of benefit to other people and then sell them, you can also include artists. Rembrandt, for example, can be understood as a great businessman and entrepreneur as much as a painter. Musicians, designers, actors, writers, architects. All of these kinds of creative people can be thought of as being in the category of entrepreneur. They may not think of themselves that way, but that's what they often are.